Thanks, Chair, and good afternoon, gentlemen. I wanted to touch on the aspects of membership of the European Union. And I think we're saying that if Scotland, an independent Scotland, secedes from the rest of the UK, it would cease to be a member of the EU, and as a new state, it would need to apply. And we're obviously aware of what's in the white paper in terms of the aspirations of a future SNP independent Scottish government. Could I ask you, what would be the process and the timeline for an independent Scotland joining the EU, or at least applying and attempting to join the EU? I think that one's for you, Professor Armstrong,
for me.
EU expert.
The white paper sets up two potential routes, one of which it favours, one of which it disfavours. The route that it disfavours is obviously the Article 49 accession routes. The route that it favours is the Article 48 treaty revision route. They have very different procedures involved in both of them, and therefore that may have an impact on the nature and length of the negotiation process.
Okay, well, I was going to ask about Article 48, but in terms of Article 48 and 49, can you maybe just, for the record, explain a bit about what they are and what it means?
The normal process for accession is governed by Article 49, that is the key provision of the treaty. Essentially, its function is to allow other member states and EU institutions to verify that an applicant state can politically, legally undertake its obligations under the treaties. That's its function. So the candidate state applies, the Commission reviews the application, enters into negotiations, and then an agreement is concluded, which would then be ratified. The Article 48 process is a process that regulates the operation of the treaties as between existing member states. It is instigated by a member state itself, or one of the institutions who would instigate the process. That would then lead to a treaty amendment, which again would require ratification. So the key procedural differences, and I think this is really crucial, is that under Article 49, it would be an independent Scotland that would be the state making the request, and in that sense, opening the negotiations and conducting negotiations. If the attempt is made, and I don't think it can be made, but if the attempt is made to use Article 48...
Which is the SNP's preferred option?
Yeah, which is the SNP's preferred option. If that is used, then in effect, Scotland would be dependent upon probably the United Kingdom opening up the treaty revision process. And the negotiations, and to that extent, would be at least at the beginning, in the hands of the UK government, not directly in control of the Scottish government. So it's paradoxical that the process that is favoured in the white paper is the one that seems to give the Scottish government the least control, at least at the level of initiating it.
Is that not a more dangerous road to go down then, if under Article 48, as you've described, an independent Scottish government would be very reliant on the machinations of the remainder of the UK government?
I think it's one of the deep problems of the white paper is the lack of candour in the risks involved in the use of the Article 48 process. Straightforwardly, legally, I don't think it's plausible. It is a mechanism by which existing member states regulate their relationships. There's a huge difference between that and Article 49 and other provisions of the treaty by which existing member states organise the relationships with non-member states or international organisations. So I think straightforwardly, legally, it is implausible to use the Article 48. But more specifically in terms of the risks, the most obvious risk is this idea that it will be the UK government that will be initiating and managing the process. It is hardly conceivable, when we think of what we know about current politics, that a UK government would open a treaty revision process, or seek to open a treaty revision process, solely to provide for Scotland's membership of the EU, without dealing with the issues that have arisen within the Conservative Party about a whole-scale renegotiation of the treaties. The danger of issue linkage between Scottish membership of the EU and the UK's relationship with the EU is, I think, massive and completely not evident in the white paper itself.
Can you just ask the point about the timescale of the two different routes?
Timescale. There is a particular risk, I think, with the Article 48 process, which is that if there is this issue linkage that then happens, so that the issue of Scottish membership of the EU, plus all the other things that a UK government might want to get out of a renegotiation, if they become linked, that is likely to create a drag on the process, because other member states will be reluctant, should imagine, to actively engage in a process of negotiation if they felt that this was the UK's opportunity to reopen a whole series of agendas that they would not want to see opened. So I think the danger is actually that the process becomes lengthened rather than shortened. If it was a normal accession process or under Article 49, there is every reason to believe that it is possible that the negotiation element could be conducted by the preferred date for independence. That would still leave open the ratification of that agreement, which might take several months, if not longer, to do.
Okay.
Sorry,
Jim,
can I be clear about your pursuing timetable?
I might just take that point forward, because I think this is a real crucial issue. What you seem to be implying is that there is every likelihood that if in the event of a yes vote, and in the event that they met their timetable as far as independence from the UK was concerned, that there would then be a period of at least months when Scotland was independent but outside the EU.
I think that under either route, whether or not the Article 48 route is used or the 49 route is used, there is a risk of that hiatus, of a gap emerging, and the white paper doesn't address what would happen.
Would you go so far as to give us a sort of odds on that would happen, and the period of, I mean, are we literally talking a small number of months or years? Would there be a transition period? That's a secondary question.
If you go down the Article 49 route, it is clear there will be a gap. That's for sure, because an independent Scotland could only formally make the request to accede once it was independent. It could carry out all the background negotiations beforehand, all the rest of it. It could substantively have done the deal, but it could only formally trigger the Article 49 process once it was an independent state, at which point then the treaty could be negotiated relatively quickly, but there would then be a ratification process amongst all the other member states. Now, if you look at the last accession, which was Croatia, the accession process took 18 months. The ratification process took 18 months. If we go back to the Austria, Sweden, Finland accession, it was done more rapidly. It was done within 6 months. And it could well be that an accession treaty would set, for example, a 6-month deadline for ratification. But there would be a gap. And that seems to be why the Scottish Government wants to go down the Article 48 route, because it thinks it can sign, seal, deliver everything within the 18-month period. But it would have to have concluded all the negotiations. Those negotiations could not have bled into any other issue that would have come up when a treaty revision process was initiated, and that the ratification process also could be conducted within that period, and I think that's highly implausible. So I think under either route you're looking at a risk of a gap. It could be as little as 6 months,
Can we therefore define precisely what the implications for that independent Scotland would be during that gap? I assume, please correct me if I'm wrong, that it means that they would not be in receipt of any EU funding, they would not be required or obliged to meet any EU regulations, and in specific issues that I'm interested in, they would not be in receipt of any common agricultural policy money for their farmers, and on the common fisheries policy, presumably they'd be outside it, therefore they would have control of their own waters, but they would then have to in part of these negotiations would be to renegotiate their entry into the common fisheries policy, with all the implications we know for those like the Spaniards and others who might have different views.
I mean, what would happen is that the treaties would cease to apply
Yep.
to the territory that would be form the part of an independent Scotland. If the Article 49 accession route was being pursued, and let's imagine that actually the accession treaty had been agreed but was not yet enforced because it was pending ratification, it's not inconceivable that that treaty could provide for the provisional application of certain aspects of the treaty pending ratification. What precisely those would be a matter for negotiation. It might be that they would be largely dealing with ensuring the continuity of free movement within the single market, but when it came to more difficult issues of receipt of funds, of participation in institutions, that would not be possible. So I think under the accession route, there is potential for some degree of managing what might be a short hiatus. I think if you go down the Article 48 route of a treaty amendment process, I think it's much less clear how you would manage the hiatus than it would be if it was using the Article 48 route, Article 49 route rather, because you might build it into the Treaty of Accession itself.
I obviously don't want to put words into your mouth, but that managing the hiatus, to use your words, includes the fact that they could be, because they're outside the treaty, not in receipt of funds, let's not be specific, but not in receipt of funds that they're currently in receipt of by virtue of being part of the UK.
In the absence of any other arrangement, whether it was politically agreed or it was in an accession treaty that was being enforced, in the absence of any of that, then an independent Scotland would simply go outside the EU at that point and not in receipt of any of those funds.
How would that affect, forgetting agriculture and fisheries, how would it affect the general trade? I mean, would it mean that Scotland would not be able to, well, presumably it would mean Scotland would not have a tariff-free entry into the rest of the European market?
It would then be open to set up an international agreement between the EU and an independent Scotland, and perhaps that could be done relatively quickly, but that would be as a non-member state, as an entity outside of the EU at that point, which is clearly not what would be desired. So there would be ways then of negotiating that, but as would be the case with any other neighbour state within the European neighbourhood more generally.